Ezra, you should know this.
I know it's Ezra, but not Menachem didn't.
Yeah, it was a joint project. Good morning, Yitzchak. Good morning, Ruvain.
Rob Weinberg, it's great to be with you.
Amazing. Oh, it was a great Shabbat. It was really fun.
Really
fun.
I wasn't here yesterday. My wife was ill.
Oh.
So I was at home.
Okay.
Before
Shlema to her.
Yeah. So she's
better
well
now?
She just needed a nap and sleep.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But that was an amazing time.
Yes, I haven't seen you since Shabbat, so it's good wow. The only thing missing, I was thinking after Shabbat, it was so inspirational to see all the sights and to meet all the people from Hebron, and the davening was good, and the only thing missing was a little time to schmooze. We didn't have enough time for one-on-ones, for just talking. So we were always, inundated with more information and more experiences, and then of course the davening and the meals. There's a little bit of time in between the Divrei Torah and the singing, but so that was a shame. But
I imagine that you were on a tour with your wife, so you probably had to spend time with her as well, though.
Well, we didn't get a chance to talk either, really. We were on the tour. We were listening to the tour guide, and we were. But in between, we did walk together a little bit. But so that was nice. But Seder, we'll do it again. We'll have more time. Bezrat Hashem, one-on-one. We're learning laws of Kashrut. Moshe's here. Ariel's here. We can start. And yesterday we learned about Nat Bar Nat. It was not an easy shiur, but it was not impossible either. I think we understood the basic ideas. And let's go back and do a brief review and explain what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the laws of how to make vessels kosher, how vessels absorb taste, which vessels absorb taste. And then that taste can be transferred to other foods subsequently cooked in those vessels, and the danger of that if it's milk and then meat, for example. And we were saying primarily it's a problem. It's a bigger problem in earthenware vessels where the taste gets absorbed very thoroughly, and so much so that they can never be kashered. It doesn't really release the taste totally, and so it's going to be always have the potency to contaminate, if you will, or to affect the subsequent foods. We learned a few limitations to that, and of course, with metals, the only difference being with metals is that you can kasher them. You can, if you put them through the same process that was used in order to have that taste absorbed within the vessels, you can do the same reverse process to get them out. Fire, liquids, boiling up in a hot liquid, so you could boil it up in water and get the taste out. Now, what happens? We also mentioned that you have to kasher them by this process, but if you use a milchik pot that was used for milky substances before you kasher it, and then you happen to cook some meat in it, so the meat's going to transfer from the pot. The milk is going to transfer from the pot to the, let's say, even if it's parva, the milky taste is going to enter that parva food. We said a few limitations on that. Number one is, it's only within 24 hours. Only that taste remains potent for 24 hours. Ben yomo. And yesterday we learned an additional halacha, and that is there's a limitation on the secondary transfer of taste. And we discussed that there's different ways of understanding what the Gemara meant. That's called nat bar nat, no tain tam, bar no tain tam. Because you have the transfer of taste, the secondary transfer of taste, right? One first taste is from let's say the milk into the vessel, and then you cook up a subsequent food in that same vessel, so that's a secondary taste. So if you, for example, a fish, does that fish become milky or not? There's really three major opinions, and we spoke about that yesterday. Now,
Does it matter if it's meat to milk or milk to meat?
no, doesn't matter. Either way,
It's exactly the same.
Yeah, that's right. Mirror image, right? Correct. There are other types of food. Which complicate this framework that we've been discussing, the mechanism, and that is called davar harif. Harif.
Strongly tasting food.
That's right. The harif means spicy or sharp. There's certain foods which are known as spicy or sharp. For example, the spice called harif when you go get a falafel. Why do they call that spice harif? Because it's very sharp. What is it made out of? Many times it's made out of sharp hot peppers. Chili peppers, right. Certain type of vegetable. Like salsa, that's right. It's also made from the same type of, or there's different types. There's jalapeno peppers, and there's many different types of hot peppers. But the hot, sharp taste, also, if you are Ashkenazi like me and don't usually ask for harif on your food, because it just, how can you eat that stuff? It's just too hot, too sharp. Still, there are foods which I do eat, which have the status of being sharp, and that's garlic, for example. Onions as well. That's right. Mustard, I'm not sure if that has the status of being a davar harif, but radishes have a very sharp taste to them, and they're called a davar harif in the Mishnah. What else?
Smoked foods, do they count as harif?
No, I don't think so. I don't think they have that.
Yeah. Anything, because if it's smoked, you'd offer a very small amount of something that's smoked will convey the taste.
Right. I don't think that qualifies. In any case, because it's not really a type of food, that's a process. Right?
Well, but it brings a certain flavor. If I were to take some smoked salmon and put it in a pot and cook it,
right,
the likelihood that you'd be able to detect it on the next thing that you cooked would be much greater than just regular fish.
I understand, but that's not the nature of the food itself. It's smoke that you've infused into the food, and you're saying that it can have staying power. But the food itself, the food substance itself, doesn't have any sharpness to it. So what's the law? What does it matter? What does it matter? Basically, if you imbue that radish taste or that onion taste or that hot pepper taste, if you imbue that into a vessel, that taste that's imbued, that's been absorbed, it might be potent for longer than 24 hours. Because maybe even forever. His opinion, the Chai Adam said that that's really potent. And as a matter of fact, not only that, there is an opinion that usually transfer of taste only happens through heat, either hot water or fire. We mentioned this before, right? That if everything's cold, you don't have transfer of taste. You can put a steak on a plate. If it's cold piece of meat on a plate, rinse off the plate, use it for milk. No problem. The taste doesn't get absorbed into the pot unless you have heat, either direct heat through fire or heat through boiling water. But there has to be boiling hot water. When it comes to sharp foods, the opinion that we are careful for is one that says that even if it's past 24 hours of its use, and even if you're using it cold, then it's still potent. It's still potent. The sharp foods, they retain their potency for a longer time.
It's also for sure.
Sorry?
Garlic?
Garlic as well, yes.
So if you, to use your example...
So let me give an example. I didn't really give any proper examples. Let's give an example, halacha l'maisa, what the halacha refers to. So the classic example is a knife. Cut. You have a knife. Now this knife has been used with hot meat. Okay, you've cut up your steak with it. Okay, or you've used it on the fire to do a barbecue, and you've turned over the meat on the barbecue. So this knife now has absorbed meaty taste, and then you use that meaty knife within 24 hours, or actually, what I just said is even if it's after 24 hours, a fleishich knife. You take it out of your drawer. It's in your kitchen. At one point, you used it for meat, hot meat, and that's why it's considered to be a meaty knife, right? We have separate cutlery for meat and separate cutlery for milchik, because the assumption is that you're going to be using it with something hot. At one point, it absorbed taste of meat. If you then cut an onion with that knife, the onion, this sharp taste in the onion is so potent that it will imbibe the taste from the knife, even if the knife is 24 hours since it's been used. And even though the knife, you're cutting a cold onion, that onion will now revive whatever meaty taste was left in the knife. And the onion will now be considered to be fleishiks. Onion will, you're not allowed to use it and put it on top of your pizza. You can use it in a fleishik dish, but the onions, you put it in the chalent, no problem. But use a fleishik knife for cutting your onion. Because otherwise, if you use a milchik knife, let's say you have a knife that was used with hot cheese, somehow for cutting your pizza, something like that. So that milky taste got into the knife, and then when you cut your radish or your hot peppers, those foods will now be imbued with some of that milky taste. And even though it's not barnat, it's secondary taste, right? It's what we learned yesterday. It's food that was entered the vessel and then it's getting, spit out or released into the second food. It's not barnat. Maybe there's room to be lenient. When it comes to sharp foods, we're very machmir. And as we said yesterday, Rav Melamed, again, he's very lenient when it comes to tastes being absorbed in metals. He says, we've learned that it's almost a given that there's no taste anymore absorbed if it's been properly cleaned. So he's very lenient about that. But most poskim, if you assume that there's taste being absorbed, and therefore you're going to have a milchik knife or a fleishik knife, or up till now I've been talking about knives. Let's expand the discussion a little more. The same law applies to pots and pans. So you have a fleishik pot. That's obviously you made some chicken soup or a cholent, and now it's within 24 hours. But we said, wait, even if it's after 24 hours, if they then use that pot, the fleishik pot, to make some, what's another name for the harif? They cook up. It's called schug. Schug. It's a type of Moroccan dish made with hot peppers. And you cook it up, you slice them up, dice them up very, very thinly. You add some oil, and you add some onions, and you add some hot peppers. If you make that schug in a fleishik pot, the schug will become fleishik, even though it's been more than 24 hours. Even though it's been more than 24 hours. Because the material itself, the food itself is a sharp type of food, it has the power to revive, if it will, and release the taste from the pot into the schug, and you'll have fleishik schug.
Would even Rav Melamed hold that way?
No. He says the absorbed taste in the metal pots never gets released, and it's not barnat, and he says you don't have to, if it's been properly cleaned, you don't have to worry about the davar harif with metals. Okay? Yes? Hirsch.
So
there isn't a 24-hour expiration date transfer of lack of transfer of taste with the foods that are heavy or sharp or white. Sharp taste or spicy? What does that mean?
In this context, in modern Hebrew, charif means spicy, but it's a specific type of spicy which we've mentioned before. Foods which that have a very strong, sharp taste. So I don't know if you would call radish spicy, but it's sharp. So sharp. Yeah.
Is there any sort of expiration at all, like a week, or is it infinite?
Infinite.
You
Is
sure?
Robin allowed?
No. Yeah, another question?
I have a very stupid question. If in a million years, we dig up a pot, or someone digs up a pot, and it says, written on it in biblical Hebrew, this pot is, and of course, what it says, fleshik in Yiddish.
Yeah, of course.
This pot is fleshik. Would we still hold that it's fleshik, even if it's been buried a million years?
Yes. Yes. We said before. We said before. Everybody agrees that you shouldn't be having using the same dishes for milchiks and fleshiks if you have a choice. Something that's been used with hot meat, cannot use it for milky products. Okay? Now the food, Moshe, if 24 hours is enough, so 24 million years is for sure enough. The food would not become treif. The food would not become considered to be fleshiks if you cooked food in it. But the dish cannot be used with milk, and if you cook milk in it, then the pot would be treif. It would be a shame after 24 million years to treif up a pot. Up until then was well known as only fleshik taste has entered it. So, but that's the rules, yeah.
How do you determine hot? Obviously, some things I think everyone would agree on, but is it eye of the beholder?
No, there's a halach definition. Usually it's called yad soledipo. How we translate that means...
Not temperature-wise, spice-wise.
Oh, excuse me. How spicy is spicy?
Some people use lettuce for their banana.
Yeah, right.
And then there's some people who, on the other side.
It's a good question. That's why I've been sticking to types of foods. Onions, garlic, radishes, hot peppers. I don't know what zucchini is. Leeks are not considered to be, I think, sharp. I don't think leeks are sharp. But it's a type of food. It's a standard. Yeah, it's a definition. One more piece. Let's go on further. Okay. I don't know what. Zucchini. Zucchini is not considered to be sharp. Zucchini is bland. Yeah, zucchini is not as sharp.
Even Toshi, I'm just kidding.
There's one more piece of the puzzle. Let's add in right now. Okay, what's another piece of the puzzle? Usually, you cut your onions or your radishes or your garlic on a cutting board. And the cutting board, if you're dealing with these sharp foods, might be problematic. In other words, you might have, let's say you could cut hot meat on a cutting board. So your cutting board is now fleshiks because you used it with hot food, okay? Or your cutting board is milchik because you cut hot cheese on it. It could happen. It sometimes happens. So, and then you put an onion on it. You take your knife, even if your knife is parva. This is why some people have parva knives, because they want to be cutting onions and garlic and stuff like that, and they don't want it to become fleshik. But let's say you use a parva knife and the onion, you put it on the cutting board, and afterwards you say, the cutting board itself is fleshiks, because previously I'd used it with meat, with hot meat. So now there is a chumrah that because it's a sharp food item, it has the power to draw out the absorbed taste, just like we said before, from the knife, also from the pot, and also from the cutting board. So the cutting board is going to give off the taste that was in it into your onions, and now you'll have fleshik onions. Okay? So we're machmer on that. Also, cutting boards tend to have little crevices in them, scrapes and scratches, because the knife cuts through the surface, and often you'll have some residue of the previous food. So it's another reason to be machmer about cutting boards, is that if it's a fleshik cutting board, you might actually have some meat in there. So if you clean it off and you scrub it with detergent and so forth, we can assume that that's clean. You don't have to worry about that. But if you're using, and therefore you can cut, parva vegetables on a fleshik cutting board, they won't become fleshik if it's been cleaned, if it's been washed. But if it's a sharp food and it's not zucchini or leeks, but it's onions or garlics or radishes, then those radishes are going to revive somehow the absorbed taste in the cutting board, even if it's after 24 hours. And those onions or garlic or radishes, if you take them and put them into a chillent, if it was milchik, it might make your chillent treif. You can't eat that chillent anymore because you've got milky onions that you put in to a fleshik soup or something like that, or the opposite as well. So you've got to be very careful with sharp foods, and that's why it's best in a kosher kitchen to have separate cutting boards and maybe even a parva cutting board and parva knives. That's really what parva knives and parva cutting boards are for this issue of sharp foods. Usually, the most I think common use is onions. So have a cutting board just for onions. Have a knife that's just for onions, and then you can cut it up and put it into your fleshik soup. You can put it into your milchik pizza, whatever it is. It's fine because it didn't absorb any taste because the cutting board was parva, the knife was parva, and that's so if you have red color for fleshiks and blue color for milchik, seems to be standard. Any other color, you can choose to use yellow, choose green, whatever you want, whatever keeps it separate. Many times those get mixed up, and I've bought many new cutting boards because the ones that I wanted to be parva, somebody used them with meat, or somebody used it with a fleshik knife, and it made it all fleshik, and then I need my parva, so I bought another one, but usually the ones I buy are parva, and eventually over time they get mixed up and they become milchik fleshiks. Yes, Ezra, go ahead.
What does is that if we're using the onions for meat or something or for dairy, we usually use that cutting board and knife for it.
Good, that's a good policy. Of course, if you're making something milchik, you can use a milchik knife and a milchik cutting board, and that's perfect, that's great. If you have designated of those kind, it's fine. But you can, keep the onions separate and you keep them parva until you actually put them into the milchik food or the fleshik food, and then you don't have to. You could just chop up some onion in the morning, parva, keep it all day, and then use some of it in your fleshik soup and some of it in your pizza. No problem. Yes, Hirsch.
So I want to understand that food is sharp in taste when it comes into contact with cooking items or eating items. It's either basari or halabi will contain the essence of that because the sharpness is important. But also, if we cook something in a pot that has either basari or halabi foods, and we put in the sharp food inside, then that pot or thing we're cooking with is going to be basari or halabi for
Yes, I just want to refine a little bit. There's one more issue that maybe wasn't clear enough. One word you said was imprecise, and that's any contact. Not any contact.
But I meant
The contact we spoke about, the two types of contact we spoke about was a knife, and a knife pressing into the food and into the cutting board. That enables transfer of taste. And of course, we spoke about a pot, cooking it up in a soup with hot water. So either heat or pressing down with a knife. If it's other contact, if it just touches and it's all cold and you're not pressing down on the onion with a knife, if you're just scooping out, some onions, fresh onions that you've chopped up, you can scoop it up with any kind you like. The taste is not going to transfer so easily. It has to be one of these two methods. The big chiddush, the big novel interpretation that we learned today is the idea of the pressing of the knife, that can transfer taste. Everything else remains as we said before. Taste is only transferred with heat, either with fire or with liquid. But if it's cold, you're not going to have any transfer of taste, even with onions and garlic, unless you're pressing on it with a knife.
So a cold press with a knife is still transfer taste.
Sharp foods, only sharp foods, correct. Yeah, only with sharp foods. Yes, correct.
I think I understood you correctly.
Review.
Countertop sinks and strainers, therefore not an issue because you're not cutting into them.
Correct. Although if you put your hot steak down on top of your countertop, it will absorb taste. Usually that's not done.
If you use your countertop as a clay, then you're in trouble.
That's right. That's really why we. It's a chumrah. What we do today in most kosher kitchens is you even have separate counters. This is the milcha counter and this is the fleisha counter. You separate areas of the kitchen. Really, it's unnecessary because most people don't put hot food on their countertops. You have a dish, you have a pot, you have a cutting board, you have something, but it's rare that you actually use it for. And the law is for kashrut usually, unless you know otherwise, we assume the normal usage. The primary usage is what we follow. So the primary usage of a countertop is as a shelf to hold pots and pans, and it's not for mixing, cutting food on it, and therefore you really don't need to kosher your countertops. They never imbibe any hot taste. But just in case, we're machmir, and sometimes there are spills. It's true. Sometimes you're moving the chicken soup over and it's so full that it'll spill over onto the counter. Well, then you've got hot fleishach liquid going into your countertop. That's going to be a fleishach countertop. And that's why we have separate countertops, but that's not the majority of the use. So if it does happen, then it becomes fleishach. So that's, but if it never did, then you don't have to assume that it did. And so essentially your countertops are parva unless proven otherwise. Yossi, go ahead. Yeah.
Also, you've got a stove. Your stove is usually placed right next to your counter. In most cases, it's electric or something, and pots and pans, they tend to bubble or fry, and hot food goes on.
So the stove top is usually treif. What's not treif is the what are they called? The trivet. This thing that you have a fire on your stove top, right? It's either gas or electric, whatever it is, and then on top of it you have something that holds it, like little legs, like a frame, like what's that called? The grill or so? What's that called?
Electric stoves have this?
On an outdoor grill?
No, or an indoor grill. If you have a gas range at home, there's these metal bars that support the pot. Yeah. You don't put the pot on top of the flame.
Oh, the thing you're telling me that you put on the grate. Yes.
The grate. Usually it's in the shape of the oven, and sometimes you'll have like some something like that above each and every. Right, this in the middle is where you have the flames. Yeah. Right, but there's like a metal frame which holds up the pot, so that the pot doesn't actually touch the bottom. The bottom is stainless steel. Grates, is that what they're called? So the grates are probably kosher, and because they're constantly being kosherized, because they're getting direct heat from the flame, and so even if some milchik spill went on them, they're going to be kashered the next moment, because the flame keeps on burning underneath them, and it's essentially doing libun all the time, which is one of the methods of kashering them. But the bottom, where you have the underneath it, the bottom surface of the stovetop usually gets spills from milchik pots and gets spills from fleischich pot, and it's usually treif. And so if you what it would matter, because if, let's say, you're frying up some schnitzels. I don't know if you've ever fried schnitzels. It's a funny food, because it's originally a German food, I believe, the schnitzel. But now it's become like very popular in Israel, and like everybody, people think it's an Israeli food. it's a schnitzel. I don't know what. Basically, it's fillet of chicken, which gets breaded, and then it's fried. It's fried up on your fry pan. So sometimes you're frying up. One second. Sometimes you fry up some chicken, and a piece falls when you're taking it out of the pan. It falls down onto the countertop, not the stovetop. If it falls on the stovetop and it's boiling hot, it's treif.
So yeah,
because
eat that piece.
So you can't eat that piece. Many people do. Many people want it's 5-second rule. No. Doesn't work in the halacha. If the countertop is non-kosher, and a piece of pasta falls down, it's a hot piece of pasta that's going to be absorbing the taste in the countertop, the stovetop. Stovetop is not kosher because it has spills from milk, has spills from meat. It doesn't get kosherized because it's underneath the fire. It's not on top of the fire. And so you got to be careful with the spills. Things that spill, do not pick them up. And if you're making chips and one falls down, that's the taste. That's all the fun of being the cook, right? If it falls on the stovetop, you got to be careful because it's a non-kosher stovetop. Okay? Yes, Yossi. So Ezra first. Okay, go ahead.
People think pita and falafel is an Israeli food.
There's a big debate. Almost, I would say, it's the cause of all the wars in the Middle East between the Arabs and the Jews, because the Arabs claim that falafel is an Arab Middle Eastern food, and the Jews say, no, this is an Israeli food. There's no more Israeli food than falafel. And before you know it, you've got terrorism and suicide bombers and everything. It all started from the debate about falafel.
More of an Arab food that just Israeli adopted because that's who will control the territory before.
The pita predates.
Got it.
The pita is a flat bread of that nature. Probably
biblical times.
Probably predates written history. So
yeah, absolutely.
What you say is totally logical. Why else would officers have falafel on their?
The officer falafel. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Yes.
Technically, then any food that's hot that falls on the floor, there's no 5-second rule
It's true, but the floor, as we said before, the floor is probably parv. The floor doesn't. It's not used for putting food on. Definitely not hot food on it. No. And so you don't have to assume that there was a hot fleischich spill exactly where your milchik food, where your hot milchik food fell. So we can assume that the floor is parv, essentially. And if you don't worry about germs, and you're not worried about it being, or you can wash it off or whatever it is, it doesn't get not kosher because it fell on the floor. But the stovetop, we can assume that they got spills of milk and spills of meat, and I assume that the stovetop is not kosher in most cases. Yes, Arya?
Just to clear things up. It only becomes treif if it's hot food that goes on a...
There has to be transfer of taste. Transfer of taste is only with things that are hot or, as we learned today, sharp foods, spicy foods that are pushed on.
Going to eat, that has to be hot and make contact with something that makes it not...
One of the items, if one of the items are hot, you got a problem. If the food is sizzling, if the food is sizzling hot and it goes on a cold vessel of the other kind, then there's going to be transfer of taste,
Even if the vessel's cold.
even if the vessel's cold. Correct. Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
if the vessel's
Don't put your
hot
hot
and
steak
it's
on a milchik plate.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
because the plate will become treif. You have to kashrut if you can. The food, whether it becomes treif or not, that depends on everything we've been saying. Let me give you just one more example. You have a question, sir? What's your?
I was just gonna say, so you can put a raw steak on a milk.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. You can have. I know people are. I see people in there. It's funny. They don't want to put their milk carton that they buy from the supermarket in the same bag with the chicken that they're buying from the supermarket. No reason not to. I mean, if it's going to spill, wash it off. That won't be absorbed. As long as you wash it off afterwards, even if it does spill, hopefully the milk is closed and, hopefully, sometimes the chicken's wrapped up also anyway. So, but in the fridge, you can put your milk next to your meat in the fridge, no problem, unless you're worried about spills that you won't notice. And, but most things you put in the fridge are covered but technically, even if it does spill, nothing will happen to it as long as you rinse off that residue of milk or that residue of meat. It's fine. No, it's not going to be absorbed into the other type of food if it's all cold. Okay, now one more example. And I was thinking of how to show you an example of yesterday's halacha of nat bar nat. Unless there's questions about darbar harif, no? So last example, it's been here in our faces every single day.
Mug. Or
This mug I use for coffee almost every morning. The truth is, lately I've been using rice milk, so it doesn't have real. But sometimes I use real milk, milk from a cow. So it's dairy. So it imbibes, it absorbs the dairy taste. Coffee's hot. It's hot enough to transfer taste. And so I have a milchik coffee mug. But then, sometimes, believe it or not, I do exist after noon. I'm not in the Machon. You never see me. But in the afternoons, life goes on. And sometimes I have a meat lunch. Sometimes in the Machon we have meat. And then I want to have a cup of tea afterwards. So obviously I clean it out. And I put in hot water and a tea bag. Sometimes even in the course of the morning I'll do that. Does this mean that, can I do that? Can I have tea in the milchik cup in the afternoon after I've eaten meat?
Yes, because it's
Yes.
not dairy.
Because it's not bar nat. What we learned yesterday, the concept of not bar nat. No tain tam bar no tain tam. Not only that, is that usually the coffee, and I don't intend to drink my tea with my meat, right? I'm drinking it afterwards. This is the idea of sometimes you'll see in Israel, at least, I've never seen it in America, but in Israel, you can go into a bakery, for example, or you can actually sometimes see on the packaging, it says, this is not milky, there's no milk in it, there's no milk products in it, but it was manufactured on milky vessels. It was the dishes, the machinery is milky. It's called bechezkat chalavi. Sometimes you'll see the stores will tell you that is this chalavi? There's rogalach. Are they chalavi or are they parva? They say bechezkat chalavi. What does that mean? It means not bar nat.
So, Rabbi,
Yes.
what they do in America is that they put the texture on and everything well. And if it's dairy, they put the D.
Dairy machinery.
Right.
Dairy machinery. No,
So
D
sometimes-
means it's
sometimes
dairy.
they'll-
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll say DE, dairy
Equipment. Dairy equipment. So the
But-
DE. That's what I'm talking
but
about.
A lot of times they just write the OU, and then if you know it's meat. But then they just write made with meat equipment or made with dairy equipment.
Right. Exactly. So
Like, they don't put DE.
So what does that
They
mean?
just
What's
say
the law?
made with-
So what we learned yesterday.
True.
So a little bit of an extension of what we learned yesterday. The dairy equipment or the meat equipment, fleshik equipment, means that you don't have it together with the opposite type, but you can have it one after the other. So we said that you shouldn't have the fish together with the milk, right? In some circumstances.
Milk with meat.
In yesterday's example, we had a milk carton and fish.
Oh,
After it was
fleshik
not bar nat from a fleshik fish, right? So we said in certain circumstances you're not allowed to. But what you're not allowed to do is eat it together with the other opposite type. But if it's one after the other, then it's allowed. So in other words, if you have buy some cakes, some pastries from a bakery, and it says it's dairy equipment, you could have it after your meat meal, but not together with the meat. After as a second course, after the meat's been finished, then you can have that because of the idea of not bar not. Also, last thing I'll say, because I have to give you a break before the next class, is that how did this mug become milchik? How did it absorb the milchik taste?
Because you have boiling hot coffee and you had milk.
That's right. Now that's, if you remember yesterday's class, we started off with a pot that absorbed taste on the fire. That's what's called kli rishon. So that's direct absorption from on the fire, direct absorption from the milk into the meat into the dish. This is a kli. I'm not making I'm not boiling up the water inside this mug. The water was boiled up in the meicham or in the kettle, in the kumkum, right? And then I poured it into here. So this is a kli. So there's another reason to be lenient and say this secondary taste is not going to remain potent. And therefore, I do many times. I have, even after eating meat, I make tea. In this mug, I make sure it's been clean, but I make tea, and then you're allowed to use the same mug. That in the morning I use it for coffee. In the evening I'm using it for tea, which is parva, and it doesn't absorb it doesn't have any potent milk taste left in it because it's not bar nut. And even especially when the original taste was not made inside this vessel, it was only transferred to the vessel. So maybe even called nut bar nut a third time, maybe even tertiary taste, which clearly is allowed according to the halacha. Okay. We'll stop here. We'll give you a break before the next class, and we'll see you tomorrow. B'ezrat Hashem.
Thank you, Weinberg.
Pleasure.
Any issue with hands? Or hands aren't clay, so it's a non-issue.
Correct. Non-issue. David, this is not stopping. Should you just turn it on and off?
Other questions, Dr. Morris?